All right, chapter 12, food safety. We're going to divide chapter 12 up into 2 weeks. This first week, we will look at what are the common pathogens that infect our food, and we'll do a couple of the assignments. And then next week, we'll do a deeper dive into how to prepare foods, storage of foods, how to deal with food in emergency situations, those kind of things. So today we'll focus on pathogens and what are foodborne illnesses and the more common foodborne illness pathogens. So, food safety, let's go over some terms first. So, a foodborne illness, a disorder that is caused by consuming the disease causing agent in food or water. So, it's you getting sick, the illness caused by the pathogen. Pathogen is the disease causing agent. Okay, so remember, pathogens can be bacteria, they can be viruses, they can be fungi, they can be prions, they can be protozoans. Okay, the patho meaning disease, gen meaning to create. So it's whatever agent is causing the illness, which leads to the foodborne infection. Foodborne infection is the pathogen when it gets into the body. It's the illness that results from that. Okay, so it can be manifested in the GI tract, the tissues, the blood, whatever pathogen it is, may affect a different body system. So it could be the most of the time it is the intestinal tract, but it can spread to tissue. It can spread to blood. Okay, and then lastly, food intoxication. This is where the illness results from the toxin or the poison that is produced by the pathogen in the body. So it's the toxin or it's the you ingest the toxin, the poison, and that is what makes you sick. Okay. Norovirus is one of the leading causes of foodborne illness in the United States. Not so much here in North Carolina. I think in North Carolina, our leading foodborne illness is still salmonella, but norovirus is one of those that has a sudden onset. You hear oftentimes in the summer of like cruise ships getting the norovirus or the rotavirus because it is highly contagious and it is spread through poor personal hygiene. Okay, not washing your hands and spreading it among um, people living in close quarters, like dorm rooms, apartment complexes, restaurants, cruise ships, those kind of things. There are no antivirals for this. You just kind of have to sweat it out and make sure you stay well hydrated and rest. Hydration is the key here because diarrhea and vomiting are one of the major side effects. And oftentimes they will recommend, or the BRAT diet, bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast, anything bland. If they can tolerate that, it at least gets some energy into the person. And usually those are bland foods that will not upset the stomach. We do have here in the United States regulatory agencies at the federal, state, and local level that help to protect our food supply. So just make sure you're familiar with these. You have the Food and Drug Administration that regulates all domestic and imported foods sold interstate between states and enforces food safety laws. They also establish the standards for food manufacturing here in the United States. The USDA enforces food safety laws for meat and poultry products that are both domesticated and imported. Your EPA looks at, your Environmental Protection Agency here looks at water quality for drinking water. It looks at regulating wastes, landfills, and sewage treatment, those kind of things. And then you have your local and state health departments that are kind of like boots on the ground. They help to inspect local restaurants, local grocery stores, your farmers markets, your dairy farms, local food processing companies, And when you look at the restaurant sanitation ratings, which you should be looking at, anything with a low 90 or a B, I would avoid it. But and they're clearly posted where consumers can see that. So we're very thankful for these agencies to help keep our food supply safe. But there's a lot you can do as well in keeping your food supply safe and promoting good food safety. So, microbes and parasites, certain foods do benefit from microbes and parasites. If you've ever had blue cheese, if you've ever had cultured yogurt, if you've ever had leavened breads and yeast products, then you have benefited from the fungi and the beneficial microbes that are in foods. However, other microbes do and will contaminate food, and we need to be careful for that. And just make sure that contaminants can be both pathogenic, they can also be physical components like plastics in foods or metal shavings in foods, or it can be insect parts or pesticides and chemicals that can also contaminate the foods. So I'm sure we've all opened up a can of something at one point or another and looked at it and said, "Ooh, what's that?" Okay, it happens. So just be on the lookout for that. Pathogens love certain types of or excuse me, pathogens are everywhere. They are housed in what we call reservoirs. When you look at, and I need to put in a slide, the chain of infection slide. When you look at how infections grow, one of those links in that chain is where is the pathogen living? Where is it housed? And that's called the reservoir. It can be in the air, pathogens that would enter our respiratory system. It can be in the water, it can be in soil, sewage, and on surfaces, and also in or on animals and vectors. So you yourself you are a reservoir for staph, for E. coli. Okay, our skin, our nasal passages, our large intestines have tremendous amounts of microbes that can potentially be pathogenic. You also have good bacteria in your large intestine, which we spoke about earlier. And then don't forget our animals. Okay, your dogs, your cats, cattle, poultry do have parasites and bacteria on them. Think of the fleas and the ticks and heartworms and things that live on just your domesticated animals that you have in your house right now. Vermin is an example of an animal that could be a reservoir for pathogens. Vermin specifically are vectors that live around or in sewage or garbage that are can spread pathogens that way. And also remember, you are and people are a harbinger. So personal hygiene, hand washing, hand washing, hand washing, as I tell my students, is the most important method to break that chain of infection. Okay, so you'll see that a lot of these fecal oral routes of pathogens are oftentimes due to poor personal hygiene, which is failure to wash hands or not washing hands properly or long enough. And then also don't forget that the reservoir or the route of contamination can also be, or the reservoir, excuse me, can be what we call cross contamination, unintentional transfer, using an unwashed knife or not washing cutting boards in between meat and veggies. Those kind of things can unwittingly spread pathogens. And just be familiar with pasteurization. Okay, it's been around for uh, a very long time, and it is still used today. A way of reducing pathogens, not eliminating pathogens, but greatly reducing pathogens and extending shelf life. So, high risk foods, okay, pathogens love, or bacteria especially, love warmth, meaning the danger zone between 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Any foods held within that limit for what is it, about 2 hours, um, run the risk of microbes surviving and multiplying. So also they need moisture. They need food, okay, especially protein-rich foods. Some require oxygen, not all, and they love a neutral pH. Okay, think of yourself. You want to be kept warm, okay? Not necessarily moist, but you like to be full. You like to have a neutral pH, okay? So do bacteria. Some examples of high risk foods, your meats, your eggs, your dairy products, shellfish, foods that we would eat raw, and fresh produce that either do have skins or don't have skins, such as you see lettuce, cantaloupe, tomatoes here, and sprouts especially. So let's look at some of the high risk people who may suffer from foodborne illnesses. So remember, foodborne illnesses usually come about with nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, intestinal cramps. Most pathogens, unfortunately, have an incubation period, meaning you don't, the length of time in which can cause the signs and symptoms. The pregnant women, very young and very old, and people with serious chronic disease or cancer patients, or in other words, your immunocompromised populations are more susceptible. And also, incubation periods for foodborne illnesses vary depending on what type of foodborne illness it is, or depending on the type of pathogen. The quickest is, I think, if I remember right, Bacillus cereus, and it's, I think, 1 to 5 hours of onset after ingestion. And then the scary one, the longest one that I know about, is hepatitis A. That one has an incubation period of 15 to 50 days where the person could be spreading it. The median for that is, I think, about 24 days. So you go from hours to days for incubation periods, and that can be pretty scary. When we look at why it's scary, you see these serious signs and symptoms here of foodborne illness. The main serious, I mean, it's all serious, but the main thing is dehydration. Okay. Dehydration due to vomiting or diarrhea, and also dehydration due to fever. Okay. Those are some of the more classic signs and symptoms of foodborne illness. Whereas things like the flu um, is more coughing and body weakness. And you got to watch out for COVID too, because some COVID um, vomiting and diarrhea is not typical, but can be a sign of some of the COVID strains. So you got to be careful with that. But stuffy nose is usually not a typical sign of foodborne illness. Okay. When we look at the more common pathogens, or excuse me, the major kinds of pathogens, we mentioned them a little bit earlier, but we're going to go into them here in detail. Remember, bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoans, and parasitic worms. This is not a complete list, but these are the major ones. Okay. And bacteria is probably, well, bacteria and viruses. Yeah, those two are the most common in the United States. So let's look at bacteria for a second. Bacteria are simple microorganisms. They can live without oxygen. So they can live in canned or vacuum packed foods and packaging. You see some of the more common type here, Campylobacter. This is found in both water and meat. Okay, Clostridium here is one that is found in soil, and it's anaerobic. And it's one that you need to watch out for really all of these you need to watch out for, but Clostridium is one of those if you can foods, because it is anaerobic. So your home canned products, which we'll mention in part 2 and 3 of this chapter, you need to watch out for that. Think of the old bulging cans, okay? that is due to that bacteria growing inside the cans. Um, Escherichia here, this is E. coli, okay, or your E. coli. This is found naturally in the intestinal tract. So it's a bacteria that is in the intestinal tract. So there again, think of that fecal oral route. Then you have listeria. This is a pretty scary one that you hear pop up every now and then on food recalls, because it can be in your luncheon meats and your cold items. So it's one that grows in colder temperatures, like below 40 degrees, and like your cold cuts, your refrigerated yogurts, puddings, those kind of things. Salmonella is one of the more common ones here in North Carolina, and it may be the one that you're most familiar with. It is found in your chicken products. And really any raw undercooked, or excuse me, eggs, chicken, dairy products. Okay, so things like raw eggs, and then lastly, Staphylococcus here. Remember, you have Staphylococcus on you. It is naturally found on the skin and in mucosal linings. And so there again, poor food handling, okay, not washing your hands, handling um, ready to eat or raw cooked foods or cold prep foods without gloves and held at an improper temperature could lead to Staphylococcus bacterial infection. The second type here is viruses. So remember, a virus is a microbe that needs a living cell in order to reproduce. So some of the more common viruses is norovirus. Okay, norovirus. Remember we spoke about that one earlier, a couple of slides ago, popular on cruise ships. And then your rotavirus here. This is more common in young children. And then hepatitis A. And remember, there's several different types of hepatitis. This one is the foodborne illness type that can be spread. Remember, it's the incubation period of about 15 to 20 days. So be careful of that one. The third type of source of foodborne illness is fungi. Now, remember, some of these are good. Okay, your molds, some yeasts, certain mushrooms. These can be beneficial. Okay, mold and blue cheese, the button mushrooms, for example, but some are very toxic. So I forget the name of this particular mushroom. Very pretty, but very toxic. An amandia, I think. I'd have to look up the name. I'm sorry. But it's very pretty, and I always remember that. Usually, the prettier the mushroom, the more toxic it is. Don't take my word on that though, because I am not trained in the different types of mushrooms. Just beware of any wild mushroom unless you're specifically trained in that. And that's because foodborne illness outbreaks can occur. Okay, and you don't hear a whole lot of foodborne illness outbreaks with fungi, but you do hear about certain GI upsets and more of a low grade, just ugh factor when it comes to um, aflatoxins or the slow molds that may be growing in coffee. Okay. Coffee, aflatoxins, or mold in coffee beans, mold in coffee grounds. Um, then you have aflatoxins that can occur in your wheat, corn, rice. So remember, um, they need warmth, they need moisture, thus the humid conditions and the food, and they'll go to town. So you need to watch out for aflatoxins. And then lastly, we'll finish up today with protozoans and parasitic worms. So your protozoans, these are your single-celled microorganisms that mostly, not all, but mostly waterborne. And you see here the uh, Cryptosporidium, and there's also one, the Toxoplasma protozoan, that is not listed here, but I think it is in your textbook. that can be harmful to pregnant women. Okay, that can live in the intestinal tracts of some of your domesticated animals like cats. So, and can be, in their feces in the litter box. So you got to be careful with that when it comes to the toxoplasma uh, protozoan. And then lastly, your parasitic worms. So these are your worms and your helminths that live in the GI tract of the host. Okay, so, or can also live in the circulatory system, as in heartworms. But you have the parasitic worms that live in the host. So your trichinella here, and then your uh, anisakis here. This is your fish and sushi that you need to watch out for. Only get your sushi from reputable sources. And then trichinella found often in undercooked pork products. Okay, so we will end part one here and we will start part two soon. And we'll look at food safety, specifically on how to prepare food, handle food, and to prepare it, store it, and cook it. I think that's next. Yep.